Welcome to Class Matters, the podcast where we ask the question, what would our country look like if it were governed by and for the working class? Class Matters is a project of the Debs Jones Douglas Institute. I'm Catherine Isaac, Executive Director. Today, in episode 14 of Class Matters, we're talking with Les Leopold and Adolph Reed Jr. about the too often obscured connection between three critical issues. One, the financial strip mining of our economy by Wall Street. Two, the resulting increase and impact of mass layoffs. And three, the anger and political alienation of much of the working class. And that's the focus of Les Leopold's latest book, Wall Street's War on Workers: How Mass Layoffs and Greed Are Destroying the Working Class and What to Do About It. And we'll also talk about how a combination of reining in Wall Street's power and building worker power through an ever stronger labor movement are keys to combat Wall Street's power. So welcome, Les, to Class Matters, and welcome back, Adolph. Let's get started with introductions. Les Leopold co-founded the Labor Institute in 1976, where he currently serves as executive director. The Labor Institute designs innovative research and educational programs on occupational safety and health, the environment, and economics for unions, worker centers, and community organizations, and is building a national economic educational train-the-trainer program with unions and community groups. Les has written several books, including Runaway Inequality: An Activist Guide to Economic Justice, How to Make $1 Million an Hour: Why Hedge Funds Get Away with Siphoning Off America's Wealth, The Looting of America: How Wall Street's Game of Fantasy Finance Destroyed Our Jobs, Pensions, and Prosperity, and The Man Who Hated Work and Loved Labor: The Life and Times of Tony Mazzocchi. Adolph Reed Jr. has been involved in working class politics for more than half a century. He's Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania. His research interests include American and Afro-American politics and political thought, urban politics, and American political development. He serves on the board of the Debs Jones Douglas Institute and is the author of several books, including The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives, and his latest, No Politics But Class Politics, with Walter Ben Michaels. His column, Class Notes, appears in The Nation magazine. And I forgot to mention that Les Leopold also serves on the board of Debs Jones Douglas Institute. So I'm thrilled today to have two of our esteemed board members. So let's get to the subject at hand. Since 1996, more than 30 million jobs in this country have been lost through layoffs, with devastating financial and health consequences for workers, their families, and their communities. Before the massive deregulation of our financial sector that began in the 1980s, layoffs were seen as business failures. Today, however, layoffs are an essential part of Wall Street's strategy, particularly through stock buybacks, to extract more and more wealth for the 1%. Both the Republican and the Democratic parties are largely ignoring the political impact of mass layoffs and resulting job insecurity. Les Leopold makes the case that workers in areas most impacted by layoffs and where equivalent jobs are non-existent are increasingly alienated from politics and are increasingly leaving the Democratic Party. So Les, let's start with a question about layoffs. How widespread are they in our economy today? And when you talk about mass layoffs, what do you mean?
Technically, mass layoffs are defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as 50 or more workers let go at the same time and are out for at least a month. That's the technical term. So when we're talking about the 30 million, that's what we're referring to, not small layoffs, not individual layoffs for whatever reason. I had thought that mass layoffs kind of faded away once the Rust Belt had settled down, and that was sort of a thing in the past. So I was actually stunned, shocked to come across this mass layoff database that ran from 1996 all the way to 2012. 20 million mass layoffs during that period, and they haven't stopped. So it's a huge deal. Workers are told, well, your industry is fading away. This is all the result of technology and trade. But your kids will do better because they're going to get into the knowledge industry, the high-tech industry. Well, in the last year, 260,000 workers in the high-tech industry have lost their jobs. Another 50,000 so far this year. So this is an enormously widespread problem, much, much broader and deeper than I had realized. And look, I write about this stuff all the time, and I hadn't understood how severe this problem actually was. And it changed the way I look at the economy.
Yeah, last I've wondered about that too. I mean, I've been watching the high tech sector layoffs anecdotally, and among other things, I wonder. Yeah, I don't want to take to suggest too functionalist perspective on this, but whether or not it's intended, one of the impacts, it seems to me, of the mass layoff, you discussed this too, is heightened job insecurity, right? Which has always been throughout the era that we call the neoliberal era. Fomenting job insecurity has always been a primary motor of the regressive redistribution. And I'm wondering how you think that, or I guess I'm wondering about the extent to which you think that the mass layoff is not simply like momentary state of the art, but is deeply embedded in this logic of what we could call post Cold War capitalism, as you put it.
I think you're right on the money. Here's how my thinking, how I kind of backed into what you said or saying. Normally, we look at the economy from a sort of macro indicator type thing. It's growing, low unemployment, wages going up. Those are kind of good things. And we kind of leave it at that. And I realized when you dig down just a little further and start seeing what workers themselves are going through, you realize that the job insecurity is massive. We asked a group of steel workers in a workshop. There were 50 people in the workshop. How many had gone through mass layoffs? Answer, 48. How many
Wow.
had gone through more than one? Like 12. And then there were people, 5 of them, I think, had gone through more than 2. It became a way of life. And I realized from the point, if we go all the way as we do as labor educators and people who try to reach working class people, when you get down to what they're actually experiencing, look at the economy from their angle. From their angle, it's constant insecurity. It's just baked into their lives. And then you ask yourself, the most difficult question then comes up is, what's the meaning of a democratic society if it can't provide stable jobs? We talk about workers not being able to, the average American can't handle a $400 emergency, or you talk about rising prices, et cetera, or buying a house. But you can't do anything if you don't have a job. You can't do anything. You can't exist as a human being, and your sense of self collapses. So this kind of got revealed to me during the Oberlin layoffs when we had intimate contact with the people that were laid off. They were crushed. They were just crushed. They'd been there many years, and they knew that the next thing that they were going to do, it was going to be really hard to find something that was even close to what they had. So this is a state of anxiety that is, a movement has to be built to deal with this, because without it, I think people are going to naturally turn to the right or to apolitical positions, even more so, or anti-political positions. Like, what the heck is democracy if I can't feed my family? So yes, it's constant now. And of course, it's the flip side of Wall Street's extraction of wealth every which way from Sunday.
So tell us more about that extraction, right? And what's different? I think in the intro I mentioned like it used to be that layoffs were an indication that you had failed as a business leader, right? And now it's the strategy, right? How does that work?
It's mind-blowing, really. It's stunningly mind-blowing. So we found these articles from the early 1980s where these CEOs are saying, I feel terrible about, laying anybody off. And now I'm being told by my Wall Street investors that I have to do more of this. And we started to look into this, and what had changed, the advent of neoliberalism, the just flat out deregulation of Wall Street, step by step, first with the Reagan administration, then doubled down by the Clinton administration and onward. What we found was that the guardrails that stopped 2 things from happening were really removed. One was, we used to call them corporate raiders. Now they're sanitized to be hedge funds and private equity companies, but they were permitted to buy up companies using 90% plus borrowed money. And then they took that money and they placed it on the books of the company that they bought, right? Like, in a sense, they bought the company almost for free. And then the company serviced this enormous debt. And the first thing they do is lay off workers. The very first thing they do is do a mass layoff. So this was frowned upon. The reason that companies didn't do it was they really weren't allowed to do it. They knew that the SEC and other agencies would come down on them and say, what are you doing? This is a precarious situation. Now it was, oh, it's fine. Go ahead and do it. Well, once they started doing it, then everybody realized they could do it. And you have mass industry on Wall Street that, I don't know, how many have been done so far? 10,000, 20,000, 100,000? I mean, there's no stopping this. That was number one. Number two was also remarkably insidious. You buy up a company. Okay, I buy up the Debs Jones Douglas Foundation. First thing I'm going to do is change the way the CEO gets paid. No longer are Kath and Isaac going to get a salary. She's going to be paid in terms of stock incentives. So the only way that she survives comfortably and then some is if the stock goes up. Well, what's the best way to make the stock go up? Before 1982, the way you made your stock go up was to make your company better, right? Better sales, better distribution, new products, etc. What happened in 1982? There was a little rule at the SEC which prohibited massive stock buybacks. You could do a few stock buybacks, meaning that you would take the company's money, go into the stock market, buy back your own shares, disappear them, so that all the other shares out there, by definition, are going to be worth a little more because whatever earnings you have are now going to be spread over a smaller number of shares. So it raises the stock artificially. You've done nothing new in the company to make it better. Matter of fact, you've made it worse. You've taken some of the capital out of the company, but the stock goes up. Well, before 1982, this was called stock manipulation, and it was considered one of the causes of the crash of 1929, right? This is not supposed to play around with the prices of things. That's manipulating the stock. So they then changed the way the rule worked, and now unlimited amount of money could go into stock buybacks. So it went from 2% to now it's over 70 or nearly 70% of all corporate profits go into stock buyback.
It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
And there are hundreds of companies that do over 100%. Now, let's go back to Catherine Isaacs, CEO, Debs Jones Douglas. You're getting paid in stock incentives. Well, what do? You try to take as much money out of the Debs Jones Douglas Corporation and buy back your own shares because now the stock's going to go up. The people who are sitting on your board with huge amounts of stock want you to do a stock buyback, and you want to do a stock buyback because this is how you're going to earn a living. So you basically have what's the opposite of a virtuous cycle? A corrupting cycle of more and more stock buybacks, more and more hedge funds trying to get on boards and pressure for stock buybacks, more and more CEOs getting paid by stock buybacks, more and more leverage buyouts, putting more debt onto corporations, and you've got mass layoffs. Now, I think it's important at this point to point out is you have to ask yourself the question, well, why are you bringing this up now? It's been going on for 80 years, or since the 1980s, 40 plus years. Why bring it up now? Clearly, this is a huge problem. 30 million add in their families. You're talking half the working class experiencing, at least half the working class experiencing mass layoffs. Well, because it's been explained away. The conventional wisdom coming from on high, the media, both political parties, is that this is not the result of Wall Street. This is the inevitable result of new technologies and globalization, global trade. And those are the equivalent of acts of God. We can't do anything about it. What are you, a Luddite? You're going to stop AI? You're going to stop the internet? You're going to stop trade with Canada, Mexico? Please. So what happened, and I found myself, and it's embarrassing to say this, I found myself ignoring mass layoffs. And I do political economy education like you guys do all the time because it became natural. It became ordinary. It became the way things go. And it was only when I started looking into how specific the Wall Street efforts were, how mass layoffs were tied again and again to these leverage buyouts and stock buybacks, then I really started to freak out. Oh my God, this is not being discussed. We got to blow through this. We got to blow through the AI myth about technology. The technology is the big job disruptors. I don't know if you caught this. There's a chapter in the book, a tackle, what about AI towards the end? I put that in because the publisher who was reading it said, hey, this is the first thing that's coming to my mind. You've got to address this. I said, what? Because you got to address this because this is what people think. Well, when you explore this, Thank God for, social scientists. They do a lot of very good studies, right? And they've looked at this very carefully. They've seen how the introduction of new technology has added jobs or taken away jobs. And lesson number one is it happens over a long period of time. AI has nothing at all to do with the mass layoffs in high tech. Stock buybacks do. Almost every mass layoff in a non-private equity situation follows a stock buyback. You announce the stock buyback to get the money for it, you lay off a bunch of people. That's just what you do. I don't know, something like 50 mass layoffs in the blue wall states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And in every one that was a sizable corporation, there was a stock buyback in a few months, 6 months previously, certainly within the year. It's just crazy. And we've ignored it. So the technology argument just doesn't flow. And again, there's a rich and varied monographic literature to support this. It just doesn't happen that way. What we're experiencing is a result of this Wall Street financial strip mining. Now, the trade thing, that's an interesting one, and that deserves actually more study. A lot of what's been attributed to we've got to move the plan overseas to keep up with the foreign competition. Well, obviously, it's a result in part of corporate written trade deals that facilitate that, make it easy, and make there's no penalties for doing any of this. But often it's also to raise the cash to do a stock buyback. The famous Carrier air conditioning company moved to Mexico. The Trump intervened and mostly stopped. Came about in the following way. A dozen or so hedge funds took a position at United Technologies, which is the parent company of Carrier. Carrier is its most profitable division, highest rate of return. But what happened was these hedge funds said, we want you, United Technologies, to do a stock buyback. So UT decided to do $6 billion to satisfy the hedge funds. And of course, the CEO didn't object. His pay would go up. They looked around, they said, oh, we can move Carrier to Mexico, save about $60 million. And when the pressure was put on, and this is a story that is important for us to remember for later in this discussion, the pressure was put on, and some subsidies were given from the state where Pence was governor, and they decided not to move from Indiana. Lo and behold, foreign competition be damned. They're doing just fine. They didn't have to move to Mexico. The president of UT responded to the bully pulpit of Trump. Here's what he said. He said, I was born at night, but I was not born last night. We get 10% of our revenues from the federal government, right? There's $760 billion every year put out in government contracts. And those people are responsive. Imagine the president got up and said, guess what, guys, you're doing no more stock buybacks when you're getting federal money. And you can't do mass layoffs that are compulsory, only voluntary. You have to buy people out. You can't use taxpayer money to then start laying off taxpayers. You just can't do that. Anyways, a lot that could be done if the nerve was there. But yes, this surprised me, the extent of it. And I realized I had kind of slipped into that globalization, new technology mythology. And it explains things away so that you then don't look carefully at the ravaged lives of especially rural Americans who see a factory go down, 1,000 people lose their jobs in Western Pennsylvania, let's say. And now you and 1,000 neighbors are looking for the few jobs that are there. Just think how it must feel.
So one of the things that struck me reading this book and having gone through your excellent training, Runaway Inequality, is that in Runaway Inequality, we talk a lot about all of these financial strip mining mechanisms of our economy, right? And how Wall Street's extracting, kind of like sucking up the wealth from the rest of us to the 1%. But with the stock buybacks leading to layoffs, you've got people losing union jobs, losing jobs with benefits, and maybe being able to find something else for half the pay. So it's also kind of sucking from the bottom. It's increasing what you talk about a lot in Runaway Inequality, which is the huge increase in income inequality. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's a really good point. I think that's a metaphor we might want to use. It's like sucking up and pushing down.
Yeah, pushing down. Yep.
And it's not an accident that only 6% of the private sector are now have any kind of union coverage. 6%. So that other 94% has no protection the piece here this will actually transition me into talking a little bit about the anger. I think Adolph has seen this also as he's been talking to workers around the country for years, which is that where do you feel that you have some protection? Well, if you have a union, you have protection. And if you have a Democratic Party fighting for you, you feel that you can do something about these really terrible conditions that you're facing, this never ending job instability. You're looking for someone actually to join with some sort of collective response. And this is not ideological. This is just, I think, human nature. If it's not there, in other words, if the Democratic Party seems to be playing footsie with the bosses or isn't concerned, isn't there when you need them, and there's no union anywhere in sight because they're just not in that area anymore, or they're not in your corporation where you need them, what do you start to do? Where's the power? The power is with the boss. You start thinking about, well, maybe a good deregulatory policy would help the boss and I won't have to go through a mass layoff. You start thinking about pro-corporate solutions. You become susceptible to supporting politicians who support pro-corporate solutions because you've got nothing else. And that's a dangerous situation for the working class to be. And it's not the first time. Adolph knows this better than I do. This has happened many times when corporations have got an extreme upper hand. Working people, or a chunk of them, may find that supporting them is the smartest survival strategy, not something that they're being pernicious or selfish or anything. I mean, they're just trying to survive, support the corporate-oriented party. Here's the question, the stunner that I don't think people have really focused on in the liberal media. Why is it the Republicans are getting higher scores on the economy than the Democrats? Why would that be? It's because the experience is still so insecure for people that they think, let the corporate party try to take it. They obviously know better about how to run corporations than the Democrats do. And I'm going to lose my job again, or I just lost my job, or my son lost his job. He's living at home, or my relatives have lost their job. I don't want to do this again and again and again. I want something different. And unfortunately, what's being offered to them is garbage, but they're going to give it a try because there's nothing else there. We get unionization starting to climb again. There's some signs that it might. That equation could change.
Yeah, I agree, and have seen the same thing. But it's also interesting, Les, that it's a combination of thinking through the boss's brain and also being, susceptible to the scapegoating. What makes the scapegoating more likely successful is a sense that the Democrats, who have historically been the party of working people, are trying to have it both ways, or are trying to put something over on the workers. And I know you mentioned in the book, we lived in Pennsylvania in 2016 and then again in 2020, but especially in 2016, where the Clinton campaign strategy was to sacrifice working class voters west of Philadelphia, basically, and to give up on Pennsylvania like she gave up on Michigan and Wisconsin, with the contention that came from Schumer and former Governor Rendell that for every blue collar vote, as they put it, that they lost in Western Pennsylvania, they pick up 2 upscale voters from the Philadelphia suburbs who were turned off by Trump. And this is the thing, that this is a strategy that the National Democratic Party has increasingly had to offer working people since Clinton in '92. And I thought the charts in the book are very interesting in that regard too. Carter was a warm-up act for Reagan. And frankly, it's true that from the standpoint of working people, Biden is the best Democratic president since the 60s, as they put it. But when you stop to think about what that means Carter, Clinton, and Obama, who gave us bupkis. So whatever Biden did, if he gave us a hot dog with no mustard, that would have been an improvement, right, over what we got from those 3. But it would be interesting, I think, to reflect a bit or pre-associate a bit on what's happened to the Democratic Party, right? And why has the Democratic Party occupy the space that we're more accustomed to Republicans occupying? And if I may, just to put a little asterisk on it, it's not just the Democratic Party here, but it's social democratic parties all over the world, right, have moved increasingly since the end of World War II to adopt a wager that they can manage capitalism's contradictions in the interest of the capitalist class more effectively or more efficiently than the actual bourgeois parties can. But I'm just curious what you have to say about the Democrats.
Well, you asked the heaviest and the biggest question that we have to deal with. I'm going to come at it two ways. The first way is the excuse that the Schumer Democrats, let's call it, came up with for their writing off the working class. The excuse was, yes, we know there's been economic devastation, which we can't do anything about because technology and trade, we know it's there. And we know workers are upset. But it's on them that those workers are scapegoating, falling for becoming deplorables. So they write them off because they actually feel they can't do anything about it. They can't do anything about the causes, which are technology and trade. They don't want to look at carefully at Wall Street, and we'll get to that in a second. And the second thing is, even if they did do something about it, these people are racist. So how are we going to appeal to them and maintain our sort of civil rights agenda, our human rights agenda, our gay and lesbian support, et cetera? How are we going to do that? Forget it. These people are lost causes and kind of good riddance, so they don't have to think about them anymore.
Says the Democratic Party. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Now,
Well, until it's time to make the booty call to get somebody to turn out to vote for you in southeastern Pennsylvania. So
well, of course, you got to do that. Yeah. So what we found in the book, we actually tried to test whether or not workers have become more deplorable. And there really are these kind of very cool voter survey studies, these long, deep ones, not like polls before an election, but with 50,000, 100,000 answers to certain questions longitudinally over a long period of time. We identified 23 hot button social issue questions, and we couldn't find any regression on any of them. And in fact, we found remarkable improvement on gay rights, for example, a jump from just in 20 years, a jump from gay and lesbians should be able to adopt children from 30% to over 70%. Even legalization of illegal immigrants who don't have felonies, pay taxes for 3 years, went from the 30% threshold to over 60%. Almost 2/3 of this is the white working class that we're identifying here, support legalization of illegal, quote unquote, immigrants. That was the language they used in the question. So on 13 of these hot button social issues, there's been remarkable improvement. And here's where we get the tie to the second part of this question. So Mike Lux, the Democratic pollster, he's no radical, right? He's a mainstream Democratic pollster, did this report last year called Factory Towns, a bunch of focus groups all over rural America. And his conclusion was this: these rural working class folks wouldn't care that much, he says, about the woke stuff if the Democratic Party gave more of a damn about the economy. In my book, just substitute mass layoffs for economy, and you get exactly what's going on. So why aren't the Democrats, or I can't speak as well about the other formerly social democratic, but the liberal technicians who have been trying to make neoliberalism work, is they're bought into, literally bought into and bought by the neoliberal corporate movement led by Wall Street. They want that cash. They see an opportunity. Politicians are nothing if not opportunistic. And when they see that money was up for grabs, they went for it. And they went for it big time. And they're not about to do anything that upsets their main donors. I'll get even more cynical now. The second part of that is a lot of political folks, elected officials, their staff, always have an eye on what they're going to do next. And working on Wall Street is about the easiest way to make big bucks that you can imagine. So, or sliding into a lobbying job for Wall Street, of which there are many, many such jobs. It creates an ecosystem, a Wall Street-led ecosystem that's very attractive. On the international level, we did get into that a little bit into the book as well, just minor part, but an important part. Again, the dominant media says what's going on is everybody's upset about immigrants. Here, there, everywhere, right? Well, study after study now has been done, and we listed about 5 or 6 of them, good ones. And they found that the turn against democracy in all of the studies, every single one, had nothing to do with immigration, had everything to do with job instability. So this turn to the right, the Democrats are allowing it and pushing it. And here's the bottom line. They are afraid to interfere with the prerogatives of capital. They literally, on the one hand, they're afraid they're going to be attacked as anti-corporate, right, both by the corporations and by the Republicans. And the idea of interfering internally in a corporation freaks them out. So They have to do it a little bit now because you can't give them all that money for the CHIPS programs and have them put all the money into stock buybacks. So they're trying to limit that a little bit. But imagine if they just said no more compulsory layoffs. Well, corporations would freak.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, hey, don't take the federal money then. That's okay. We don't want to interfere. That is the kind of pro-worker, anti-corporate position that scares the hell out of the Democrats. How many do you think would go along with that? Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. The one that really interests me, though, is Sherrod Brown. This is almost embarrassing. I found out he had written an essay, a series of essays called Wall Street's War on Workers. And the last,
really?
yeah, the last one he just did and reissued from 2019 is called Wall Street's War on Workers, stock buybacks. And this is what's cool about it. He understood, look, having a framework is the key to labor education. You can pound people with facts and figures, and that's important, but people need a way to hold it together because the world comes at people from all angles and they're struggling to make sense of it. And if you don't provide a coherent framework, people will drift towards all kinds of things, including conspiracy theories, because it's just a natural human impulse is try to make sense out of what's coming at you. What holds this issue together with this problem I'm facing with that problem I hear about, or this and that? Well, we found runaway inequality was our first shot at a framework. Now we're trying to use Wall Street's War on Workers as a even more focused framework. Well, Sherrod Brown, never having talked to us never having talked to him, doing the same thing in Ohio. Now, why the hell is he doing that there? Well, he ran 15 points ahead of Trump in Ohio in 2018. 15 points ahead of what Trump did 2 years later. It's a red state. And he's realized he can talk to working people using the frame Wall Street's War on Workers. Well, he's not going to get a lot of corporate money. And he's got the guts to say, I don't care. A, it's the right thing to do, and it works. So the thing I'm struggling with, and I'm going to try to write about this soon as well, by highlighting his pieces, saying, why aren't more Democrats doing this? Yeah, I mean, Bernie can do it in Vermont, and Elizabeth can do whatever. They can do whatever they want. They're never going to lose in the states that they're in. They're strong Democratic states. But with everybody else who's trying to compete, why aren't they trying to do this? Last example, Mingo County, West Virginia. Now, Mingo County is turning out to be I'm not the only one that focused on this new book on white working class rage. Also starts with Mingo County. Why Mingo County? Well, for me, Mingo County, and for many labor people, it's where Mother Jones spoke. It's the home of the coal wars. In a way, it's the birthplace of the United Mine Workers. There was a civil war going on there right after World War I. Unions guns were ablaze, people were being killed. State and federal troops came in and basically occupied it for about 10 years. And then the Roosevelt administration basically legalized unions, and they were repaid by the voters of Mingo County in West Virginia tremendously. Mingo County went for Bill Clinton in 1996, right? This is after 4 years of experiencing him, 69.7%. Every 4 years, it went down, 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 down. What did Biden get? Hang on. 13.9%.
Wow.
13.9. Mingo County has a lot of dubious honors. It lost the most coal jobs of any county in the country. There's only 25,000 people in the county. Went from 3,300 in 1996 to 300 now. So they lost 3,000 jobs. What did the Democrats do? What did their savior do? The party that saved them from the coal wars, gave them a decent standard of living, let the United Mine Workers flourish. What did they do? Answer, nothing. They let the free market, quote unquote, come in and do its thing, right? It's supposed to. It's going to be land is cheap, labor is cheap, new industry will come in. What was that industry? Opioid pill prescriptions. Mingo County became the opioid pill prescription capital of the world. First, one pharmaceutical company started doing it, was putting out a prescription a minute. Cars were lined up from a 5-state area getting their prescriptions in. Then, like capitalism is supposed to do, just like Milton Friedman teaches us, a second drugstore opened. This one, a former convicted pimp came in and set it up. Can't make this up. This is all a beautiful expose in The Guardian. That drugstore became the 22nd largest prescriber of opiate pills in the country, larger than any drugstore in New York or Boston or Washington, or, Chicago, LA, Houston, Atlanta. Mingo County population 25,000. Then on top of this, hedge funds, the coal industry is collapsing, but there's still legacies it has to deal with, like the land and retirement benefits for UMW. Well, there's a whole specialist of carcass feeders, vultures, that come in when these companies are in bankruptcy and feed on the carcass. And they attacked what the first thing they did is they tried to get rid of all the healthcare benefits for retirees, mine worker retirees. UMW fought back, but in some cases they were unable to succeed. This is what was the Democratic Party's policies for West Virginia and Mingo County. It's a travesty. And think about what could have been done, even by Jimmy Carter, who created 700, 800,000 jobs in the CETA program back in 1978 during a recession. Here is a mammoth depression. This is no little recession in Mingo County. They could have gone through West Virginia, had town meetings and say, what do you guys need? Well, people would have said, our schools are falling apart. We need more healthcare facilities. We need our roads rebuilt. We need these mines reclaimed. We need the rivers cleaned up that have all been polluted through the strip mining, and on and on and on. And then, for not much money, decent public federal jobs could have been created, put people into meaningful work. Then the other private sector businesses would have come in to try to get the money from the people who now have money in their pocket. This would have been seen as wildly popular in West Virginia. Instead, they gave the state to the Republicans. So you got to work hard at benign neglect or not so benign neglect to go from 69.7% to 13.9%. You got to really not care about working people. And, oh, yes, well, it was environmental reasons. I'll tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't racism, sexism, xenophobia. That county is 95.8% white. Obama got 3 times the percentage of votes that Biden got. So don't blame this on increasing racism. This is the failure to replace badly needed coal jobs, 3,000 of them in a county that's that small. Anyway, you might have a better and more coherent explanation for the collapse of the Democratic Party, but it's a problem. And this is what could lead us to a second Trump term. This directly can lead us, not because these people are racist, sexist, etc.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, because it was also clear at the national level in 2016 and in 2020 that the central national leadership of the Democratic Party was more afraid of a working class discourse coming from the left, from Sanders, than they were of the possibility of a Trump victory, right? I mean, both times. And that's still the case. And as is typical, if we do wind up going farther down the path toward authoritarianism, I think the Democrats will be just about as responsible for it as Republicans.
You got to prove to working people that democracy works.
Yeah, that's right.
If democracy can't produce stable employment, tell me exactly what it's for. My dignity is collapsing. I can't support my family. I'm behind on all these bills. Yeah, I'm going to go vote for the county clerk, and I'm supposed to be excited about that. That's supposed to be some great privilege for me. Yep. I thought I was voting for years for the people who could best provide a decent standard of living for all of us. And what they did was provide an incredible standard of living for the top 1% or the top fraction of 1%. And they've just turned their backs on us. Don't expect me to get excited about democracy. I've been trying to make this case to the people who are working against authoritarianism, trying to do classes on it and whatnot. And I'm saying, you can't just talk about rights. You can't just talk about voting rights and gerrymandering and minority rights and gay, lesbian rights, et cetera. All important, but you can't just talk about that. You've got to talk about mass layoffs. A stunning result. We found that somewhere between 15 to 20 million white working class Republicans are socially liberal. They're already there. You don't have to sacrifice anything on your agenda. I call it political malpractice. How could you not go after those people, given how close elections are, especially in the blue wall states? I'm desperately trying to get this book into public discussion. I don't get any money out of it. I think this issue has to be discussed. We found solid evidence to show that as a given county in Pennsylvania Wisconsin, and Michigan. As its mass layoff rate goes up, its Democratic vote goes down. That's holding everything else equal. These counties are almost all white. You can't blame it on they got, more races. How could they get more races? I feel like I'm screaming from a mountaintop into the wilderness saying, wake up. Mass layoffs are going to destroy our society. You got to put a stop to it. You can put a stop to it. And let me make this point. One of the comebacks here is that if you do this, you're going to destroy corporations. You can't prohibit them from balancing their books through mass layoffs. You know what the answer to that is? Give me a break. We were fortunate enough to interview the I.J. Mittal international union coordinator for the Siemens company. And Siemens International has 400,000 employees. They spun off a division, which they mostly own, called Siemens Energy, 90,000 employees. So Siemens Energy decides it wants to get out of it making compressors for fracking. Who knows why? So they're going to lay off 7,000 workers globally, 1,700 in the United States, 3,000 in Germany, their home office. Well, in Germany, they have co-determination. Half the board seats are worker and worker representatives, including union officials. And of course, that system was foisted on the Germans by the Americans during the end of World War II, because the Americans realized that workers were less likely to go fascist than their bosses, who were part of the German war machine. A lesson somehow we've forgotten. Anyway, so they were there, and they did this big investigation. They slowed down the mass layoffs in Germany. And then finally, they got the company to agree to the following. One, no compulsory layoffs. Either you buy them out or you can't get rid of them. And the second agreement was even more stunning. 6 facilities were going to go down. And these were in small towns, and they had done campaigns in those towns to, protest and whatnot. Siemens agrees to put a different product in those 6 facilities and keep them open. In the United States, they shut down all the facilities. There's one in Olean, New York, a southern tier just above Pennsylvania, very rural, as you know, former heavily industrial area, Corning, et cetera. 500 jobs, steelworker jobs, gone. Schumer goes in there, doesn't try to stop the mass layoff, but he's struggling to try to get somebody else to come in the plant, which would be nice. I think he might have found somebody that may produce a couple hundred jobs. The 500 workers are gone. By the time those new jobs are there, they're for somebody else. Okay, but that part, Schumer wasn't as aggressive as he should have been. I should have taken a page from the German workers. This is the part that really kills me. He invites the president of Siemens Energy to the signing of the infrastructure bill. And she puts out a press release saying how wonderful this new bill was going to be for jobs. Now, I call him on this in the book, saying, what are you thinking? And I'm raising this issue not just to blow another hole through the Democratic Party, but to say these corporations are enormously flexible. They can move the chess pieces around any which way they want. And once they get told they're not going to do a mass layoff and they have to go to non-compulsory layoffs, or they're not allowed to do stock buybacks, you'll quickly see them move products. UPS is laying off a couple hundred people in Michigan and Pennsylvania. You're going to tell me that UPS can't figure out how to rearrange all those deliveries there a little bit to keep those people employed? Come on. So the idea that this can't be done is terrible, because it comes from economists like Paul Krugman, this idea of fatalism, that basically rural America is being left behind. You got to move to where the jobs are in the suburbs. You can't do anything about it. You're telling a huge percent of the country there's nothing that can be done for you. Good luck. Wish you the best. That's a recipe for authoritarianism.
Now that's the final question. Les, I think that our final question for all of our guests is always, how would the country be organized if it were governed by and for the working class? Okay.
I'm going to get there through how do we get enough power to make that change?
Good.
Okay. I've been around the block now a few times, as have you guys, and we know that a coherent movement cannot form without organization.
Yep.
And we also know that the labor movement has that form of organization that nobody else has. Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, wonderful things happen and then they disappear because there's no internal structure. So the labor movement has got to be a key to this. I'm very pleased by what I see coming out of communication workers, and especially coming out of the United Auto Workers. I'm starting to hear labor officials for the first time in a long time, probably since Mizaki, talking about the class as a whole. To
Mm.
hear Sean Fain say billionaires shouldn't exist,
Right.
he's saying something to people everywhere, and he's talking about he's trying to organize. I'd like him to take the next step, and I think you guys would appreciate this. What if he formed basically an anti-Wall Street, anti-mass layoff political association, $1 a month, kind of like Labor Party Advocates, which I thought was really a strong organization when we had that for a while. I think he could get millions of people to join. Simple agenda, no complicated thing on all these other things. Job stability, stop having stock buybacks, stop these leverage buyouts, private equity ripoffs. Very simple, coherent platform. I think people will run towards it. Then we could start talking about, what would it look like if the working class actually ran the country? Step number one, meaningful, decent paying, stable employment. Number one, we do that, and I think you will see a renaissance in this country, a working class explosion of creativity and thoughtfulness about what to do about the environment. I think one thing that people forget is that union people understand anti-discrimination as well as anybody in the country. The whole reason unions became popular in many cases was to stop, management discrimination, management favoritism. So it's not a jump from that to gay and lesbian rights. It's a smooth path to that. Everybody should be treated in a non-discriminatory way. That would flourish. We see this, Catherine, in that part of the runaway inequality activity where we ask each group to take a sheet of paper and describe what would their world look like without runaway inequality. Well, if we change that question, what would it look like without, Wall Street's war on workers? They draw these incredibly moving pictures of their communities. Exactly what your last question has solicited from so many thoughtful people over the last couple of years. And they get up and explain them to their coworkers in the workshop, and applause breaks out. For me, I get tears in my eyes. I think we're crushing people that have so much to give, but they can't give it without this stable employment. Get us to that, and I think there'd be a renaissance here. I think we'd kind of see the form of social democracy that we all cherish so deeply. And all I can say is you guys are remarkable in having this kind of very direct discussion, bringing people on that are willing to address it. And that's what we need. You're asking the same question we're asking people in workshops. We should be asking it all over the country. And I think people will flock towards it. Now, all we need is the kind of political movement that allows people to join something and feel empowered by joining with others. You always have at the end of your emails the feeble strength of one. And it's true. It's true. I feel it just when I'm trying to do my thing and promoting the book and writing, you feel powerless. Boy, you feel a lot better when you get on a show like this and you can talk to your comrades. And especially when you get to talk to working people and their leaders, the kind of people that should be listening to this show, and I hope are listening to this show, who can make a difference. And we don't feel isolated. We can build something, I think, that's downright glorious if we just give them the chance.
Well said, Les. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you both for a thought-provoking episode. You've been listening to episode 14 of the Class Matters podcast. We were joined today by Les Leopold and Adolph Reed Jr. Our podcast engineer is Jimmy Wirt. Subscribe to Class Matters wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you can, support us on Patreon. And please get your hands on a copy of Wall Street's War on Workers. And thank you for listening to Class Matters.